3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and we have an exciting show for you this evening. We have William J. Hall, and he is the author of the paranormal bestseller, The World's Most Haunted House, and this is a true story of the Bridgeport Poltergeist on Lindley Street, that is, and this is in Connecticut, happened in the 70s. Really amazing things have happened in this house. And I actually spoke to Paul Eno, who was actually there when the refrigerator lifted up. And police officers have witnessed what's going on there. Also, firemen. I think there was many, many witnesses. And our guest tonight has spoken to a number of them. Welcome to the show, Bill. You want to be called Bill, don't you?
Oh, yes. Bill is fine. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for being on. I'm really excited to talk about this because it's a real exciting case. And first of all, a little bit about yourself. Now, you were into magic for many years, and I think that actually gives you an edge because my friend that was into magic, I would discuss certain things with him, and he would tell me, yeah, well, that can be done through this way or that way. So tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, if you would.
Yes. I started doing magic when I was 7, very poorly, but and I was always a curious child. You know, I loved magic, and like most children, I also loved In Search of, which was a show when I was growing up. Now they have History Channel and, you know, a lot of those kinds of things, you know, with the unknown, and that always fascinated me. And I would get asked a lot of questions when I did shows about, you know, is this real? Is this, you know, what do you think about this? And I was open-minded, but I really demanded, you know, some real solid evidence. And I knew how easy it was to fool people because I didn't think I was amazing, you know, as a kid, and I was able to fool people. So I realized the faultiness of our brains when it comes to interpretation. But I also started writing for some local newspapers in exchange for advertising, and I was writing a column called Magic and the Unknown, and I would debunk a lot of things. And, you know, occasionally I would come across a story that would make me go, you know, it's kind of weird. I didn't get to the end, you know, where it was a debunk. It was more like, I don't know, you know, I mean, didn't mean it was true, but it was, you know, pretty interesting. And some of those later on I debunked, and, you know, some of those I never did. They seemed like they were, you know, legitimately interesting kinds of stories. And Lindley Street I never really looked into, but on Facebook somebody was posting it, and I remember a lot of people asked me about it, and I didn't really have much interest in looking into it because as a magician I figured anybody could throw plates around and call the newspaper. And but then again, I never really researched it either. It was a case of really just not caring. But later on, I realized with Google and everything, let me look into it. I never really looked into it. And when I did, I saw a lot of names, a lot of witnesses. I saw a lot of newspaper stories. And it didn't mean it was true. But when I saw those names of witnesses and what they said, it told me that this was worthy of further inquiry. In other words, if it was a hoax, hey, that's okay. If it wasn't, that's okay. But it seemed like there was a heck of a story there just by reading the newspapers. So that's kind of the evolution of it. And I was a weird kid, and I guess I'm a weird adult. You know, when I come across something like that, I like to, you know, you like to look into it. So I finally had the time and the interest and looked into it, and I found that there was gold mine there because I ended up getting in touch with Boyce Beatty whose name was in one of the later newspapers on Lindley Street, and he had 30 hours of interviews with witnesses that have never been heard, with the family too that never been heard. So nobody really knew the full story of Lindley Street, and in fact, I did another 10 hours of interviews, and Boyce said he learned by reading my book too. I'm not boasting. It's just that nobody really had the full story. It wasn't told because the family wouldn't talk, and so nobody really knew the whole story. So the book is written from 40 hours of interviews. There's nothing made up in there. I mean, the weather, the police officer lighting a cigarette, all those things are from their testimony, and those interviews took place literally just 1 or 2 weeks after it happened, and some a little bit later. But it was it was very fresh at the time, and a lot of those people weren't alive when I was researching this. So it really was a unique find to be able to have such a well-documented investigation going on. That's what pulled me to it. It was a lot of witnesses and a lot of documentation, both written and then to have 40 hours of witness interviews. And I think I started with about 68 witnesses, and now I'm, as far not firsthand, but if you include secondhand, sons of police officers and family members, and then you're talking over 150, and the stories that they tell that confirm and cross-reference what was uncovered is really unbelievable.
Yes, and can you tell the listener out there exactly, I know this started in 1974, but the family adopted a child, and just, if you would, just go into the whole story on what exactly happened there.
Yeah, certainly. So the basic overview is we have a family that has it's Laura and Jerry Gooden, and he is the maintenance man for Harvey Hubble in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and she's a housewife, and they have a little child, Jerry Jr. He ends up dying when he's 6 years old. He had multiple sclerosis. He had a bad fever. It was really sad, and they really mourn his death pretty hard, and then they end up deciding to adopt, and they adopt a little girl, Marcy, from Canada, from Ontario. So they adopt her when she was about 4.5 years old, and behind the scenes, this is before it went public, there was some things that were happening, a chair out that Jerry thought he pushed in, keys misplaced, little things, things that made him think he was getting old, nothing really, crazy. But it all really exploded later on. Marcy was older, and she was about 10 years, she was 10 years old when the public story broke. And leading up to that, when she was 10, she was picked on at school. She was picked on. She was in kind of a rough public school in downtown Bridgeport, and she was picked on because she was a little Native American girl in the middle of an Irish and black neighborhood, and she didn't really quite fit in, and she was shy. So between those things, she was picked on quite a lot. And after a year of being picked on, she was beat up pretty bad in the cafeteria by a boy, and she was stuck at home for 6 weeks in a body brace.
Really? Wow.
And her mother and father, her mother especially, was very overbearing because they lost Jerry Jr. She was really overprotective of Marcy, which didn't help anything. And they lived in a very tiny bungalow, 768 square feet. So it's a tiny little hole in the wall in the middle of the city, not like out in some you hear most haunted houses, you think of a big Victorian out in the woods, and maybe there's one or two witnesses. There's a priest that changes his story, and it's he said, she said, and that's it. But this was a tiny little house in the middle of the city, and to just give a very short overview, and then of course we can get into details. What happens is all of a sudden there's things going on in the house, and a police officer that's a neighbor across the street comes over, and he tells him to wait on the porch. He goes in. He's blown away because couches are opening and closing, and TV's turning, and refrigerators moving, and things are happening. He doesn't know what to do, so he calls for backup. Backup police come. They don't know what to do, so they call the fire department. The fire department comes. They don't know what to do, so they call the chaplain at the fire department. The priest comes and said, "This place is, scary," And then the neighbors call the Warrens, and they show up with Father Charbonneau and Paulino, who was is a dear friend of mine now. I met him through the research in the book, and he came too. So this story evolved from a natural progression of people that kept coming into this little house, seeing things happening, and saying, "What do we do?" and trying to call other people because they don't know what to do. Meanwhile, people are coming out of the little house, police officers and firefighters, and they're starting to tell these stories, saying, "I saw this, I saw that." So word gets around, the newspapers start showing up. Before you know it, there's 2,000 people up and down outside the house. I mean, this became a real public poltergeist case, and it was that's what was so unusual about it, is it was so very public. Public as far as the number and quality and amount of witnesses, as well as the town being involved, with police protection every day and the road being blocked off. I mean, it was a huge, crazy spectacle that literally went virtually around the world, ended up in Australian newspapers, and Canada, was in all the states. And so it was a really, it was truly unique when it comes to these cases. When you look at documentation and witnesses, this case has so many witnesses, and they're all seeing the same things. If sometimes there were 11 witnesses that would see, one thing happen, like Marcy being picked up and thrown across the room by who knows what. It was, invisible force. So when you see something like that, and you say, well, who's a witness? What was it, one guy, or, you didn't see the whole thing, or, no, we're talking, room full of people, police officers, firefighter. I mean, it was a tiny little place. It wasn't like anybody was faking anything. Mm-hmm. So as a magician, I could say, hey, yeah, I can make a picture fall off the wall, and I can make a rocking chair rock, and yeah, I could do those things. But when you look at the totality of the evidence here, fakery was not involved. I mean, we all could argue as to what it was, but I know 100% as a fact that it was not a hoax. What exactly it was, of course, that's where that would be up for debate. So.
Now, I heard somewhere, or I read somewhere, that the police ended up calling it a hoax just to get people to stop hanging around the place. Is that a true story too?
Yes, it wasn't really the police department's idea. Although at first they suspected the child, because that would be a natural. Usually, parents are the last ones that suspect their children, and a lot of times it's not common, but there have been cases where kids would throw things around and then say it was a ghost, or whatever, would fool the parents, and then once anyone came in, whether it was police or paranormal investigator or whatever, it became obvious it was a child. So there has been that. So I mean, the police originally kind of suspected Marcy, but quickly that was dispelled by the activity they were seeing, especially a lot of the activity when Marcy wasn't in the room or even wasn't in the house. But what happened with the hoax story was, after a few days of this going on, two officers that never were in the house before went in, and they saw Marcy kicking a TV while she was sitting on the floor there, and they asked her, they said, the officer said, "I saw you do that." And she giggled, and he said, "Why did you do that?" And she said, "I wanted to see what the demon would do." But they took that as, "Oh, look, it's her." And then, of course, the public doesn't. The public just goes with what you say. They don't think about the other officers that said, "Hey, we saw this refrigerator float." You know what I mean? So a lot of the police officers, there's about 26 police officers in the Bridgeport Police Department that were pretty ticked off that they were made to look stupid by, coming out with a hoax story. But, they understood that it was almost a necessary evolution, unfortunately, because the crowds kept getting bigger, and the news went across the country, and the superintendent wanted his city back. I mean, what do? You can't tell people, well, we don't know what it is, because more people keep showing up. And so when the officers called in, they said, "Oh, I think the kid's doing it." Then the detective that was supposed to close the case, because he was told in no uncertain terms by Superintendent Walsh at the time in Bridgeport, he said, "I want you to shut this down. You need to make this go away." So, I mean, he had to get rid of it, even though he knew it was real, because he heard all the explanations. So when they called him with the story, he said, "Well, now I've got my opportunity, so yeah, we'll roll with that."
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they did, was announce the hoax. The interesting thing about it, though, is after publicly announcing it a hoax, the police department set up a conference room and mandated that any police officers that were in the house and saw activity were to be interviewed by Boyce Beatty and his Jerry Sulfin and Keith Harari, the three gentlemen who did the investigation. So the police department certainly would not mandate these non-optional interviews with paranormal investigators after it was announced a hoax, if it was a hoax. And that I found out early on, and that's what intrigued me to look into the story further. I said, that doesn't make sense, because I talked to Officer Joseph Tomek, one of the first responding police officers, and he said, we were forced to be interviewed. He said officers were taken off the street. And then later on, when I got the interviews, I realized that, that confirmed the story, and there were other confirmations of that. So that's what was unique about this case, too. It wasn't just one police officer saying we were forced to be interviewed. You listen to the tapes, and there was numerous officers, and so you confirm it with the investigators, you confirm it with the police officers. There was multiple ways to cross-reference the information, so it was fascinating. But that's the way the hoax story came about. Somebody actually tried to set the house on fire, so that gives you an example. It was really becoming a dangerous scene. Anytime you get a big crowd together, that. Yeah. We all know that, unfortunately. But, they really wanted to get rid of it. Plus, you can imagine it was an embarrassment to the city of Bridgeport. They have to have police at the house every day? I mean, really? That's an expense, and it doesn't make you look too good. So they really want it to go away. They even tried to plead with the newspapers, would you please, tone it down and stop, reporting on this? Of course, they really didn't, because, everybody wants to know. So, but that's how that came about.
Can you imagine what things would be like today with social media and the internet? It would be, even more people would be there.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And what was interesting is, the 2,000 people outside the house, and that story going all around all the states, it was very fast. I mean, it was from the first day, in the morning when things really, when there was a lot of activity, to later on, once New York reporters showed up and it went on the AP Wire, the story was just everywhere. So yeah, today it would have there would have been 2,000 people there within an hour or something. So yeah, so it's very fast.
Now, the first person I did the Everything Else show with was Paul and his son, Ben Eno. And Paul was actually there at the house where I think that he said police officers and firefighters were there when they all saw I think he said it was a 400-pound refrigerator lift up and move. And to me, something like that would almost be life-changing in itself if I saw something like that.
Yes, and that happened many times. So when Paul saw it, was a different time when the 4 police officers saw it, which was a different time when the plumbing and electrical inspector saw it. So I mean, it was happening numerous times, and they all described it, and that was interesting. Boyce Beatty. You couldn't have had a magician conduct that and get any better than him. I mean, he really, when somebody said a refrigerator floated, he said, well, wait a minute, what did you see? Did it go up evenly? Did one end go up first? Did it make noise? How high did it go? I mean, he really conducted that. They all did as a real scientific investigation. They did it right, because otherwise, as a magician, if you told me a refrigerator would float, I would say that's your conclusion. Mm-hmm. I don't know what you actually saw. I just know your experience told you a refrigerator floated. If I do a magic trick, I can make you think I turned back time, but that's just the way I present the trick. That's really not what happened. So, or I can tell you I never touched the envelope when really I did, but you just really didn't see it because it was on an offbeat. So, he didn't let people get away, not people get away with it, but in other words, if a table lifted up and turned, he wanted to know, did it turn with a speed that was faster than how gravity would have taken it once it got up, or did it go extra fast? Did it make a noise? Did it go even? Did one side go up? He really wanted details. He didn't care what you thought you saw. He wanted to know detail by detail. What you saw, what you didn't see, did you see it from the beginning? So that to me was fascinating, because I was really nervous that I was going to get answers like the table floated, and he would say, wow. Uh-huh. You know what I mean? Because then we really wouldn't have known what happened. So he really got into it. So kudos to my good friend Boyce, who I've had the pleasure to lecture with a few times, and also give him the recognition that he never got, because that investigation was done with the family, and those interviews were done with the understanding that they would not go public. The family didn't want it. Of course, now the family is deceased, so he felt the story, of course, now to be told. But so that that's that part. But
well, now usually when there is some type of haunting in a house, they always try to attribute it. For instance, my father had a house, I might get into the story a little bit, where there was an Indian attack and the children were murdered on a terrible situation in Kittery, Maine years ago. Did they attribute, what did they attribute to this haunting when they were trying to figure things out?
Well, I would say we definitely know that the culmination of when this activity really took off, when things really were happening, which was after the family came back from a trip to New York. But Marcy was beat up at school. She was stuck at home in this tiny little place with the overbearing mother. And they didn't get along too well. She was pretty neurotic and overbearing. the father was, great guy, but he didn't. I don't think he had too much power in that in that team there. But so she was very. She held everything in. She was quiet. She was, suffering through all this, and I think, that negative energy, or whatever you want to call it, type of energy, sent out the right frequency and attracted, the right entity or entities that appear to, as my good friend Paul would say, that appear to feed on this kind of stuff. At least that's what it appears. So I would attribute it more to the family situation and dynamic, and the frustration and repression that Marcy was feeling, based on everything that culminated up to here: being picked on at school, being shy, not having many friends, and then being stuck in this little house with the body brace from being beat up. And this is when it all exploded, was right after that. So, I mean, some people say, well, I think it was, the dead Jerry Jr., and even the family at one point thought maybe it was that. But of course, you reach out for all different things because nobody really knew. But in the classic poltergeist sense, Marcy, not that she willingly caused it, but I would say it definitely had to do with the energy she was putting forth. And later on, when Marcy was found, she did suffer from epilepsy and multiple sclerosis, which epilepsy or frontal lobe disorders seem to, and I say seem to because it's hard to get a lot of data when you're talking about things like poltergeist. But it certainly appears to be more common based on the little data that we have. We do find people who would have been called the quote unquote agent. I don't know if I abide by that agent philosophy, but whichever. That it's quite often that they have epilepsy or a frontal lobe disorder, and it seems to be. And I say seem too, because again, this is more, anecdotal than real data, but it appears like empaths seem to have a lot of physical problems like fibromyalgia and sometimes frontal lobe issues. So, I don't know which comes first, chicken or the egg, but it did turn out that Marcy did have epilepsy, which I found very interesting because in my research I found that I wouldn't say it's all the time the case, but when you find epilepsy being there in 6 or 7 or 8 cases, you'd say, well, that's odd. Wasn't like that many. Based on the sample size, not like everybody has epilepsy. So
right.
So I think that was the cause. You can argue that, the land and the underground stream, and that there was the right geofactors. And I'm sure that there obviously are other factors than just, a child being upset, because otherwise there'd be poltergeists everywhere. So we know that there's other ingredients, and we may not even have them all. But I would say that really was the catalyst. And nothing's ever happened in that house before or after. And maybe it could happen again if you get the right mixture in there. But I think, I would say that it's pretty clear that was the common thread that kind of really started the activity.
Okay. Now, I know she was Iroquois, Native American, or she was from Canada. Do you happen to know if there is any folklore in the Iroquois tribe, so to speak, whether they had any similar situations, or did you look at that angle at all?
Yes, I did. When the book was originally published, I didn't have I didn't have that information.
Mhm.
What the family said in the interviews is they said they were told that she was the youngest of 9 children, and she was the only one given up for adoption, and they think she was abused.
Uh,
So that's kind of, but that ended up not being true. So an addendum was put in because what happened was I was contacted by one of her biological half sisters, and they knew her. So this was a big breakthrough, and this happened afterwards. They had read my book in Canada and had contacted me and said, we're reading this book, and it occurs to us that's Jean, because she didn't go by Marcy. You don't really want to go by the same name when you're the center of this huge story, And so they said, we're the half sisters. There's a half brother, but we didn't meet. So they only met her. They met once or twice, kind of to get together as sisters. But her mother had those pregnancies as a teenager, and therefore gave the children up for adoption. So she didn't have any she didn't have any tribal upbringing or anything like that. She was quite young when she was adopted anyhow, but even before that, she didn't, have anything like that. There was some things that she did when she said, rocking back and forth, saying she's talking to her grandfather or something like that. And that's interesting. Does it feed into it somehow? Who knows? But I do know through talking to the half sisters that she led a pretty happy life, and the last 5 years were very difficult due to the medical condition. And I found out that she died because she's my age, so she was 50. I think she died at age 50. She was my age when it was right when I found out about it. She's the same age, very young, and had died from the multiple sclerosis and seizures and all. It got really bad at the end, and it was a fan of the book contacted me and said, this sounds like Marcy. So I called up the coroner's office, who placed an ad because they didn't know what to do. They couldn't find any next of kin or anything. And I called up and, gave the birth date and social and all that stuff. He says, yep, this is her. And he's the one who gave me all the information on her from, told me about the epilepsy. He also told me, before I told him about the book, that he had a really weird feeling when he went in the room. And he said, he's been doing this for many years and nothing ever really, spooks him, but he felt a little spooked at first. And he said that before I told him, oh, by the way, there's this book and how it all fit together. But I ended up matching the half-sisters to Marcy's ashes, and the beautiful end to the story is they buried her on family land.
Oh, that's nice.
Because before that, she would have been in some room in the coroner's thing, just sitting there on a shelf, So I know we're all around the story, but I'm just babbling as things come up. But those are relatively new developments that I found out afterwards, and then ended up adding them in as an update, because the story just is it's ever evolving. You run into people who were connected. I lectured once at Boyce, and we ran into Father Doyle's sister. Father Doyle was one of the witnesses who never publicly admitted that the place was haunted. And, on record, he always said, well, we can't jump to conclusions, because he didn't want to get in trouble. And, I knew from the police reports that he must have believed it was real by what they said. But we got to talk to the sister and hear the inside story. So it's just, it's like Kevin Bacon, 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. The people you run into that were connected to it. Oh, I dated the captain's daughter, and he was worried and very nervous about all this and wanted to put a kibosh on it. You got all these different stories from these different people that were connected in some way, and they all validated what what was being said. So it was very interesting to have that validation from multiple sources, and not just one person said it or one person saw it. So to me, that was the most fascinating part of the case. This was really the case that told me beyond a doubt that this stuff is out there. Didn't tell me what it is,
Mm-hmm.
but it told me the behavior, and what is a poltergeist, people would ask, and I said, well, we can't tell you exactly what it is, but we can describe its behavior, and that's how it gets its name, and so we could talk about that, and then we can argue as to whether it's a demon named Fred that likes peanut butter, or whether it's something that from a different universe, or whether we really have no right to say at all. It's just something unknown, and leave it at that. Everybody has a different take on it, but I think this is the case that did it for me. Actually, it would have convinced me better than if I had seen something myself, because I probably wouldn't have trusted what I saw.
Mm-hmm.
Unless it was something pervasive, then of course I would. But you know what I mean? If I saw something, I'd figure, I don't know, I'm seeing things, which is very common, when people first see this stuff.
I was at the Mount Washington Hotel in New Hampshire this weekend, and a friend of mine used to manage that place. It's a beautiful, it's turn of the century. I guess it's late Victorian resort in the mountains in New Hampshire. And my friend told me years ago that when he managed the place, it was haunted. He saw things slide across the bar, and there was some figure in the stairway and all that. So while I was there this weekend, I started talking to the people that work there, and they said, "Oh yeah, it's going on," and they were telling me different stories about, the door buzzer, buzzing when no one was there, and clothes sliding on the rack right in front of them, stuff like that. Stuff still going on. It fascinates me. This case in particular, did you ever think that it's possible that Marcy may have been somehow not attracting the energy, but somehow putting out the energy that made these things happen? I know that sounds strange, but
No, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. That's one of the theories that people have about poltergeist is that it's psychic energy put off by the agent, which would be Marcy in this case. And I think it was Bill Rolls that believed psychic energy put it out, and then there's a possibility of entities being involved on top of that. So kind of opening a door. So sometimes the door is open by doing that, sometimes it's not. I know Marcy was putting out, I believe that it was the frequency of the energy putting it out that kind of attracted these entities. But I do agree with Paul that there's a lot of things that happen in the house that don't appear to be intentional. That probably was a result of the energy being there versus an entity doing it. For example, a refrigerator floating is a good example. I don't think that was done by an entity on purpose. I think that was a result of that energy being there. Same thing with a model boat moving a little bit. But picking up Marcy and throwing her, or like when she's in a chair and it floated up, and that happened multiple times. Those were very personal things, and we can't even say for sure that those were quote unquote attacks, but they certainly appeared to be. Picking her up and throwing her against the wall happened. Her being lifted up in the chair with the chair flipping, and being thrown out of the chair. So, I mean, there were things like that that were happening that definitely appeared to provoke, I guess you'd say, to really make, a cross coming off the wall and floating down, things like that were more intentional, as well as one of the, Joe Tomic told me that he went in later and just went into Marcy's room and said to himself, "If you're here, show yourself." And he said at that moment, he said everything was shaking on the walls. And then he said, "Okay, now you can stop." And it stopped. And he told me, he said, at that moment, I knew it was real. He said, but there was no way I was going to put that in any police report. It would have been the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
I admire him just for the fact of the police report that he put in there, because all the police reports are. He actually sent me a copy of the police report. Boyce Beatty, being the professional that he is, he read all the police reports into the tapes to make sure that they were preserved, which is great because, of course, they don't retain those things for longer than 10 years. And I think with Lindley Street, they probably got rid of them a lot sooner too. So, but yes, I think some of it is the energy that happens to be there. Paul would say it's the multiple world intersect causing that energy. Paul's pretty positive about that. I only differ from him in one respect, is I do think that is the best theory on the table. But I'm not positive that's it. And maybe Paul isn't either, I don't know. But of course Paul has seen more than I have too, so so I can understand. But I do think the multiple world version of the multiverse would nicely explain all of the paranormal. Of course, we do know, based on history, that it's always not as simple as one answer, or something like that. But it seems to be the best theory I can think of. I don't think these things are demons. I don't think that. I mean, I could see why they would be called that, because they appear to act that way. People feel, like Lorraine Warren felt nauseous and sick in Marcy's room, and we equate sickness with evil. Not all of us, but I mean, I've heard that a number of times. When I've done lectures, and somebody said that they were in this historic house and they felt ill, so they know it was haunted by an evil spirit. And, I challenge that and say, well, do you think the flu is evil? Because, we equate sickness with things with negative entities or whatever, but sickness is neutral, really. I mean, is the sickness because of those multiple world intersects, or is the sickness because you've got nasty entities in there? I don't know. Maybe it's one or the other or both. Maybe it really doesn't matter. I don't know. Sometimes it ends up being the electronic, the EMF, those frequencies that can come in through water pipe. Shane, Sarah and myself, we had a case where people were going crazy in the house, and it was really a bizarre historical case, and it ended up being the electromagnetic frequency coming into the house through the water pipe was really severe. And sure enough, this lady had tumors most of her life, and her husband died of cancer, and and those things make you see shapes out of the corner of your eyes. They make you emotionally change. It's really, basically, it's a fake version of the paranormal that's unfortunately very real and damaging. So sometimes it's that, but I mean, it is. I don't think it's all one thing. I think a lot of times it is provocative, and we should assume, it must be the entity, or in the case of Paul having an altercation with the entity, picking up Marcy and throwing her and getting around Paul, that's a pretty clear message of some sort. Although I always try to ask, well, did the entity pick her up, or is that a result of energy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't like to assign. I don't like to assign intent to it. But Paul was there and felt it, and you know, many of the people that did feel it felt that it was something negative. So you know, it's hard to say. But I try to give the entities the benefit of the doubt, if you will. I think, you know, I think how would I be if I was in a different world, or if I, you know, maybe they're not even there by choice. Maybe the frequency, you know, sucked them in or something, and they really want to go home because they were watching TV or something. You know? But
or their equivalent of TV. Now,
yeah.
So on the slideshow up on the YouTube right now is her artwork. Can you explain what that is real quickly?
Yeah, Marcy always was interested in art, and she would draw and make things, even when she was, you know, when this happened, when she was 10. And later on, when I found out about her life since Lindley Street and her growing up and going to college and different things that happened to her life, I also found her artwork, and I think her biological sister sent me some of her artwork. One or two pieces, you know, were published. I mean, she didn't make, you know, money that way necessarily, but so you know, that artwork was found, and so I wanted to share that with people, you know, read the book too, so they can see that. Boyce recently gave me all of the case files and all of Marcy's original artwork, which I was quite flattered by. He handed it to me and said, "Now you're the curator of this." So, so I got all the original slides and the 260 incident sheets and Christmas cards from the family and Marcy's original artwork. So, but that's why the artwork is there, just because we all were fascinated and wanted to know, you know, what happened to Marcy. And where is she? And could you interview her? And fortunately, we found her. Unfortunately, you know, she wasn't with us anymore.
Right.
But connecting with the biological sisters did give us some insight into, you know, some parts of her life and what her life, you know, was like. And she remained to be a big animal fan as she was as a child, and continued to draw, and appeared to be a gentle and nice person, and didn't appear to be, you know, weird or maladjusted or anything like that.
Yeah, I feel bad for her. She sound like she had a pretty rough beginning for sure.
Oh yes, yeah, and her teenage years, I'm sure, were you know, not the greatest too, and ultimately she left the house because she didn't get along with Laura, the mother.
Yeah, way too small of a house not to get along with someone.
Oh yeah, tiny.
Someone in the chat room wanted to know if there was any orb experiences.
No, there really wasn't any orbs. There was these gauzy-like entities that were seen. There was Father Charbonneau with the Warrens in the basement. They saw this like black figure form. And then there was one point, and Paul was part of this experience too, where the whole house started billowing with smoke, which I hear is somewhat common in some exorcisms or that kind of thing. So those were three kind of other kinds of manifestations. There was no mention of orbs, just you know, moving objects like crazy. One of I think I think one of the scariest things for the family was when they were out, and this was Christmas time, and they came home, and Jerry would go in first because he was used to kind of checking out everything, and all the ornaments were off the tree and in a little corner, in a little pile, and that really freaked out Laura. That was that, and then in the kitchen, their Mother Mary statue had fell over on which could have been coincidence or whatever, but still, the whole thing was just seeing the ornaments in a pile like that was that were anything that was personal like that, or a chair flipping over is frightening, but when you start really kind of assembling things like that, there was another time a baby stroller that was wheeling by itself, and those were the more freaky things. And obviously anything that involved Marcy was scary. And there was audible things. There was the whole thing started when it started really taking off. It started with banging, and that actually occurred every year, usually in the fall, for a few years before all this really took off. It would be a banging on the insides and outsides of the walls, and it would start slow and then get louder and louder and louder. And Jerry called the police. The firemen checked it out. Everybody checked it out. They didn't know what it was, and the police officer friend, Officer Holsworth from across the street, suggested that they record it. And they actually recorded the sounds, and they ended up giving the tape to Ed Warren. Ed Warren gave the tape to Boyce Beatty, and then Boyce Beatty gave it to me. So actually, there's another, with the book comes a special URL where you can go and you can hear the poltergeist sounds. And it's eerie when you hear it in context. But yeah, so those banging sounds were a big part of it. There was footsteps, knocks on the door with nobody there. There was footprints on the stoop that looked wet, but it was a dry day. There was windows just spontaneously smashing. A lot of different activity in there. But yeah, it was any of the personal things like the cross floating, pulling itself with a nail off the wall and floating down, and that was witnessed by a police captain. And he backed his people, but he couldn't say, "Hey, I saw this cross come off." But he said, "If my people said they saw it, they saw it." So he did defend his people. But yeah, no orbs. So.
I've had this reoccurring dream that I get. I finally get the house of my dreams, and it ends up being haunted. And I've had that a number of times. But the reason I bring that up, if I was in a house that anything like this was going on, I would get so far away from there so fast. Did they want to move away and couldn't?
Yeah. So a few things that I think will bring context and some understanding to it, and I'm glad you asked me that, because I'm sure that a lot of listeners would wonder about that too. Is the real intensity of this took place from like a Thursday to Tuesday, and then aside from the knocking thing, but they weren't scared by it. They were more annoyed. They didn't know what it was. They didn't connect it to anything, like the haunting, or poltergeist. But after that, things did happen. But when things were at the height, the police were inside with them. Either that was the situation, or they often went to stay with family. Mm-hmm. And whether they went, to stay with family or stayed at the house, depended on, how bad the activity was. And then later on, there was a period of time when Marcy wasn't at the house at all. She was staying with family. Jerry and Laura didn't really want to burden family every single time, so they would stay at the house, but it would depend on, if it got bad or not. And there was a point when, they always had an overnight bag packed, and the routine was Jerry would get up in the morning and, see what's going on. And again, if the activity was the same as it was during its height when it went public, that Thursday to Tuesday stretch, then they probably all would have moved out and stayed with family and not come back at all. But it did die down after that, even though it still continued until it ended in January of 75. So, like most poltergeist cases, it was not long-lived, but it was extremely, there was that period of extreme heightened activity, even while people were going in and out of the house. So that's unique, too.
Mm-hmm.
Most of these kinds of cases, you go in, and the activity will stop until you got to kind of be there for a while and blend in with the area before things start. But this was such that police officers were going in and they were seeing things happen in every room, and they just entered the place. So it was an unusual, very heightened activity for poltergeist, but it wasn't that way for months on end or anything like that. And it ended by Marcy getting a scholarship thanks to Father Doyle, who knew the place was, he knew and saw stuff because he was trying to bless the place, and the holy water kept getting knocked over. So that's when he left, and he couldn't come back there. He couldn't breathe, and he just didn't want to go back to the house at all. But he was very supportive to the family, ended up getting them a scholarship to take Marcy out of to not have her go back to the public school, because the parents said, we're not sending her back there, and got her into a private Catholic school, and then everybody was friendly to her, and the activity just petered out. So that's why I say it's pretty obvious that her frequency, her emotional, condition was sending out that kind of negative frequency and attracting these things there. And then when her mindset changed, it stopped, which is very common, that we find in these negative haunts. And I'm not classifying everyone the same, but it's very often when you have a parasite or entity, for lack of a better word, the first thing, as you probably ask is, what's going on? Something's going on in the family dynamic, or something's going on in the person's life. And once that person changes the way they think, they can put an end to it.
Well, so it petered out. It just stopped completely. Now, does the house still stand today?
It does. Matter of fact, I drove by it today. Yeah, it does. There was only one owner. It was vacant for a few years. The family did want to get out of there. And actually, Jerry put it best. He says, I don't care about, he says, it stopped happening, but I can't even live in town because, people were making fun of them. They were pulling the clothes off the line and, slashing the tires. And, they were really, as Bill Roll once said, the antics of the poltergeists are only as bad or beaten by the antics of the people, the onlookers. And this was so public, and that Jerry was getting ridiculed at work, and people were, of course, constantly taking pictures and trying to get in there, and all that kind of stuff. So, they wanted to get out for that, and they couldn't sell the house. And so he painted the house so that it wouldn't look the same. And after doing that, it got in the paper, haunted house painted, So there was no, so they ended up deciding to stay there. the activity had ended, and and they didn't have money to replace the things that were ruined. There's about $5,000-6,000 in property damage just to the stuff inside the house. And there was a time, Jerry went through various emotions, very anxious, a lot of anxiety, some fear, and then a lot of hatred. A lot of hatred during it. Hatred meaning, he wants the thing to come out so he can fight it. You're trying to protect your family, and you can't get your hands on this or fight this thing. And at one point he was so tired of it that he went to the hardware store and he got wire, and he wired the furniture that was left that wasn't damaged. He wired the stuff to the wall. And then, of course, they took all the pictures down, and they were packing stuff up, because they can't have anything on the walls because things are falling down. And but unfortunately, ended up breaking and ruining, a lot of things in the house. He even put the Christmas tree in a bucket and filled it with cement. I mean, he was serious. Wow. He didn't want it to ruin Christmas, but it ended up going through the wire anyhow. And Boyce was fascinated by that because the wire wasn't broken. The tree was held by the wire, and then they were there. They got up, and the tree was now on the other side of the wire. So that kind of freaked them out. But But yeah, he even did that with the wire. He's like, if I can't move, then I'm gonna stop this thing from having fun. And then I think he left like one dresser thing not secured to the wall, just so he can check and see if it's So it really was, if you look at what they did, it wasn't like the horror movies. It was very much a real response to that kind of thing. All the different things that were tried, and Marcy staying at family. Sometimes when it got bad, they would stay. And I have heard from a lot of people, well, I would run out and never come back. But we find in real hauntings, that's not usually the case. People usually don't run from their house. They tend to, it's their house. They tend to not. I mean, some do, and some ultimately, like my good friend Edwin Becker, you probably know his story, True Haunting. I'll give his book a plug. Ultimately, they had to move. And yes, that does happen, but one thing doesn't happen and people run out. They usually stick it out and try to figure it out, trying to fight it, it's a myriad of emotions versus the Hollywood single, scream and run. Although Laura was pretty much the Hollywood scream, and but yeah, more like a myriad of emotions than just how it's portrayed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier that Marcy was a real animal lover, and I saw those pictures of her with a puppy and then a German Shepherd. What was the animals' reactions to what was going on?
Well, yeah, and they felt kind of bad because they got a new dog from the pound in December, and but they always had a dog, and they had a cat. And the dog would be found under the bed, and so it was very, very much, the dog was frightened of it. The kitten, there was audio phenomena, and in the basement, Father Charbonneau swears the cat said jingle bells, and other people heard it. And when Marcy was thrown across the room and hit her head, there was it was Bob Pantano, the now defunct WNAB, but a radio guy. He was one of him and Tim Quinn were doing a story on it, and they were in the house. And after Marcy got thrown across the wall, which they saw from beginning to end, he swore he heard the cat say, "Help." Now, I don't think the cat talked. Jerry would say that he heard that, he heard things from the basement where, because they would keep the cat in the basement sometimes, because the dog was big, and if they're going out, they didn't want the dog and cat to play together and the cat get injured because the dog was, very big. So they had the cat in the basement, and Jerry would come home and hear things like, "Let me out, you dirty Frenchman," and he, of course, everybody would laugh at him when he'd tell the story, and he'd say, "No, I swear that cat is talking." But I don't think the cat talked. I think it was audio phenomena, and I think, like the proximity effect used in ventriloquism, or for the audio experts. If you hear a sound and you look and there's a cat there, you say, "Whoa, the cat talked." You're associating with the sound with what's nearby. Similar, there were swans on the porch, and the crowd actually saw the swans. They were these swan planters in the 1970s. These were big. They're like these big, heavy ceramic planters, and they were shaped like a swan, and then you'd put dirt in it with some, So there's two of those, one on each side of the house, and those were actually moving by themselves.
Wow.
People in the crowd not only reported it, the police officers were complaining about it, and actually one police officer, they were saying they were hearing guttural sounds, and they said the swans are making sounds. So that's another example. I don't think the swans were making sound. They were hearing this audio phenomena, because there was knocks on the door, there was footsteps, there was chimes that were going off by themselves, and knocks on the door, and there was that kind of phenomena. So I think people just naturally associate with what's nearby, and so I think that's how the cat got dragged into it. But Paul always fancies telling the story, as does everybody else that saw it. The newspaper people putting a microphone to the cat, saying, "I hear you can talk. Could you say something?"
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of really crazy ingredients in this.
Yeah,
case.
for sure.
Even a talking cat. So.
Right. So there was recorded audio. Had anyone attempted any type of filming, or taking pictures of anything that was happening?
There's some. I had heard that, and this is during interviewing different people and talking to boys and stuff. I think the Warrens wanted to film,
Mm-hmm.
and I think they even had some equipment in there at one time. And the story is that Laura got mad and told them to take it out. So I think they would have wanted to. There also was, I think it was a producer or somebody the Warrens worked with that was in the house for a short period of time. So I think there was a plan to do something like that, but the Goodins put a squash on it because they didn't want publicity or anything like that. They just wanted to get rid of it, and they want to be left alone. They didn't want the crowd and everything. But they had a falling out with the Warrens because Ed used their phone to make toll calls to New York to get reporters there to spread the story, and which is that they didn't want it spread. They want to be left alone. But now it probably would have spread anyhow. But Ed saw it as a something people needed to see and know, and of course I'm sure it didn't hurt their career either. So,
right.
But yeah, that really ticked off them because they're trying to, they're trying to live in peace and get rid of the people, and he's inviting people to come down, and that's how it got on the AP wire. Is he called up and they came, and once they took the photos, then the story spread around all the states and even outside.
Now, at one point there were like a couple thousand people that descended on the area. Did they actually let certain people come into the house, or did they just want them to all go away?
The only people that they let into the house, well, they let the Warrens in because their neighbor had seen the Warrens lecture and said that maybe they can help. And so they figured, well, why not? Nobody else has an answer. The police were there, the fire department, the priests, they figured, why not? So that's how they let the Warrens in, with Paul, and Father Charbonneau. WNAB, they listened to that station, so they liked Tim Quinn and Bob Pantano, so they let them come in. One of the guys from the Bridgeport Post, John Sopko, who I talked to, he presented himself very nicely from what the family said, so they let him in. They made it a point of not letting a lot of people in. Their big thing is they wanted people to know that this is not made up, that they're not crazy. So yes, they did do a little bit of that, but the people on the street and whatnot, no, they didn't let them in. There were neighbors that were coming over with pies and things like that because they're trying to get a peek in the house, and and of course they let family and friends in, and like one of their friends said in an interview, the whole again Holsworth, different Holsworth. Lady said, well, what do you mean, am I scared to go in there? I've known these people for years. I've been to their house a million times. I'm not, so, they did let, of course, family and friends that stopped by. But, during that real turbulent time, the Warrens were there for a good part of it. And I think they did offer some good comfort and company, and I know Paul did a great job, and Father Charbonneau, wonderful. I don't know him, but I feel like I know him because I listened to all his interviews, and he just seems like a great guy, and the way everybody described him. So, so I mean, they were there, and other than that, there were again, there was police that would stay inside. With them. And, one time Laura said, do you think we should stay there? And the officer said, well, you probably should go somewhere else. And they all left, so, but that's kind of how they managed it. There were onlookers that, of course, constantly tried to get by the police after it was declared a hoax, and they were supposed to take Marcy to a psychiatrist. I mean, people were running after him, and they even ripped the pocket off of Marcy's coat, as a souvenir. And they were coming up and taking pieces off the swan and the decorative ceramic swans. They were taking chips of paint off it, and they were taking little pieces off the branches on the what do you call it? The little tree in front of the house. I mean, it was crazy.
Wow.
I guess it's just normal people stuff, but very, very strange.
Right.
So, and then other people were very nice and respectful and just doing a vigil out there, or just curious.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned the father, the minister. You just said his name. I don't remember it, but had anyone thought to contact a priest and actually, did they think of an exorcism? Was that anything that came up?
Yeah, that was floated around, and the church didn't want to touch it at all. I don't think it would have helped anyhow, but because usually that, at least my belief anyhow, is that none of these entities respond to any religions. Mm-hmm. No matter what. They'll make a cross fall over because they know that seems to get your goat, rile you up, but I don't think they respond or subscribe to any religion. I think when those kinds of things, when religion does work, is it convinces the person. So if you break that frequency and that person now has temporary peace, the activity could calm down and then it starts up again. Why? Because it's not the real answer. You haven't gotten to the root of the problem. The root of the problem is Marcy, and the way she's thinking, and to get rid of that frequency has to be broken, within her, which happened when she settled into the nice school, and now she was, I guess, giving off positive energy or regular energy, whatever you want to call it. Everybody has different terms, but so I'm not a subscriber to any of that. Matter of fact, my good friend Shane Saraway and Paul, in any investigations of parasites or entities, I mean, Shane has never used religion, never needed it. And that's because I think it ultimately, again, it convinces the people so it can get rid of something temporarily. But I equate it to like an allergy pill to get rid of the symptoms, but it's not really getting rid of the root cause of it. But yes, they did try, and the bishop basically said no way, and they weren't going to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Not that I can blame them.
Yeah.
You don't want to get involved in something that public. Father Charbonneau blessed the house, and but again, I think really that these things don't subscribe to any of our religions.
Yeah. I had a situation happen several years ago, so I'd like to tell you about it and just get your feedback on it.
Sure.
Now, I did tell this to Paul on the show back in January. So years ago, I've been in the fine arts and antiques business and also in the auction business. Years ago, I cleaned out a place for an auction, and there was nothing really left but junk. And the lawyer asked me if I could, clean out all the debris and sweep it down, get it ready for the house to be sold. So I said, sure, not sure. It was a slow time of year. So it was winter time. So all the windows were down. In New England, they have storm windows, and they were all down. I was upstairs in the bedroom, and I had just taken all the coat hangers and put them in a garbage bag out of the closet. Now I had to pull the door across the carpet. They installed the carpet without cutting the door, so I had to really pull hard on the door to open it. When I walked out with a bag full of hangers to drop in the hallway, all of a sudden the closet door slammed. And I went back in, and I took the door, and I pulled it back and forth, and I go, oh my God, what is going on here? Then the broom fell down the stairs, and 2 seconds later, the front door slammed. There was no wind that day that I was aware of. I went down the stairs, and the broom was leaning against the door. And there was a basket that I was all done. I told someone that was helping me out what was going on, and he was laughing at me and picking on me. So I was in the garage. There was only one item left. I was tossing it in a trailer. It was a basket, and when I went to go pick it up, it was stuck on the floor, and I pulled so hard it separated, and the bottom part of it was still on the floor, and I tossed the basket into the trailer, and all of a sudden I just thought, that I bet the bottom isn't even stuck to anything, and I tapped it with my foot, and it was moving free. It was just weird stuff.
Wow.
But it happened firsthand to me, and I've always wanted to stop at that house to find out if things are still going on there. But I saw this happen. It happened. I saw it, and no one can change that.
Right. And, my second book, Haunted House Diaries, is on an active case that Paul was working on and graciously invited me in. And we got audio, we saw stuff, so I felt I had the best one to cases you can possibly have. If you don't believe what you see, don't worry about it. You got Lindley Street has tons of witnesses, and guess what? Now you can feel and experience it yourself, and so it's real. And and I knew it was with Lindley Street, but still, it's not like I was living in a haunted house, and I'm happy to say I wasn't afraid.
Huh.
But I think that's only because, not because I was brave. I think that was only because I was working with Shane, and I was working with Paul and Mark D'Antonio too, astrophysicist friend. He was the one to validate all the photographs and tell me some of the cool photographs I had was, or that the family took were optical illusions and lights and stuff like that. But, that's what he was there for, even though he's a buzzkill. But, but yeah, in experiencing that, I wasn't afraid. But like I said, I think that was because it was put in perspective for me that these things, yes, certainly, you can get hurt if something flies, knocks you in the head, or you trip down the stairs because of something. Yes. But I mean, by and large, this kind of stuff, if you remain in control, you could, you could be the one in charge. And so with kind of thinking of it that way, and I know some people will disagree and say, well, we tried that. And certainly there's all kinds of situations. But I mean, I think going in with all the research I had done and all the knowledge from these guys who've been doing, good stuff throughout the years, I had a different perspective on it. If it was just in my house and nobody talked to me about anything and all this stuff started happening, I mean, who knows? I'd probably just run out of the house. Whereas now, I don't know if I would. I think I'd say, "Oh, book 3." No, But that's a difference too. I was wanting to, to be part of it and experiencing it. So it was a bit different. It wasn't like going in there hoping that nothing happened. Which is what it would be if I was in some dark place alone.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. No, I was going to say, and people say, well, if your place is haunted, would you be scared? And I'm like, well, I can't answer that. I mean, who knows? I mean, it's my house. It's a little bit different. I mean, I couldn't tell you. I might be I might be fine and be able to handle it based on everything I know, and or I may run out screaming.
Getting back to what you were saying earlier about Marcy having frontal lobal issues and epilepsy, I believe that's what you said. Did you happen to know her blood type? Because there's a lot of links between is it Rh negative? Rh negative blood and people claiming to have these weird things happening to them. I know that sounds off the wall, but did you happen to know her blood type?
No, that I don't. Originally the coroner was going to try to get me, some of the medical papers, but he couldn't, which is understandable. I'm sure it's not a good thing for him to be releasing that stuff. But that I don't know.
Well, I was asking for someone up on the, someone in the chat room. Do you would you consider this I know it's not real evidence, but one of the more evidential cases of any type of poltergeist out there?
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, I would describe it as, the Roswell of haunted houses. And I mean, really, I mean, when it comes to evidence, I don't think, I mean, yes, it's not enough for it to not be pseudoscience. I mean, you and I believe it, know it's real. A lot of our listeners know it's real. But as far as, is it enough evidence, from somebody on the outside? Well, if somebody is not going to believe it, I mean, I understand that. But if you're looking for a case, that comes the closest, I would say this would be it. Certainly, there are plenty of crazy cases, but this, as far as documentation, you can't.
Yeah, hang on just a second. We have a caller. I think he's calling from Europe. Caller, your name and where are you calling from, please?
Hi, is that Matthew Willis?
Yes. Where are you calling from?
Hi, I'm calling from England.
Yeah, and your name, please?
All
right. Jonathan.
Hey, Jonathan. So you have a question for our guest?
Yeah, it's actually the first time I've managed to watch your show live, and I've watched your show quite a few times, going to bed actually, so it's fantastic. But yeah, I mean, tonight's show is regarding paranormal experiences, and I was around 5 or 6 years old, and I actually had an experience for a few years continuously every night. Basically, my nightmares or dreams, whatever you want to call them, were continuous. They were absolutely exactly the same. I don't know what you call them, but they were exactly the same every night. And I would go out of my bed, go downstairs, the light switch wouldn't work, and I would run back upstairs. But before I got the chance to run back upstairs, there would be a face at the top of those stairs, and it would look at me, and it would pull me up, and at that point I would get freaked out and wake up. But yeah, every single night, and that was for around 2 years, 3 years. In fact, it was closely towards the point that I actually left where we were living when I was a child. The only point that those nightmares actually stopped was when I actually confronted what was at the top of that face that was at the top of those stairs, and I actually went, wow, okay, I've had enough of this, and I basically went, stop, no, and right after those, and right after I said that, those nightmares stopped from then. But at that point as well, what I want to add to that was that while those nightmares were going on, the alarm clock that I had, I would wake up around 2 minutes, 1 minute before that alarm clock went off every single day for those 2 or 3 years that was going on. So I just wanted to add that whole story and that whole sort of episode and everything that was surrounding it, just so you got a whole picture of what was going on, really.
Yeah. Did you also have a question for the guests, or you just wanted to tell us that?
To be perfectly honest, it was actually that, but I suppose, yes, you're right. I wouldn't really suppose it was a question.
Yeah, okay.
More of a question for both of you, because, in fact, actually more for you, actually, because you've questioned and interviewed actually quite a lot more people in more of a surrounding area. I'm actually a bit of a UFO fanatic, since I've actually seen a couple of UFOs in my previous history over the past 20 years. I mean, I'm 33 years old now, and I've seen those over quite a long time, and it really it makes me question quite a lot, because there is a bit of a conflict, because with the the issue of, I suppose, a ghostly presence, and then UFOs in terms of a scientifical presence, it's a bit of a conflict there. And it's really troubled me over the past few years, because I'm like, well, because scientifically and ghostly, godly in a way, has been quite a bit of a conflict. So I'm like, what do I understand? Where do I go? What is life? What is death? So it really makes me sort of question everything, really, because I really don't know what to understand, where to go. And do you understand where I'm going?
Yeah, I do. So, Bill, why don't you address the overall question? It sounds, where do you go? Where do we go to get answers? We can talk to intelligent people that may have had, experiences, but it sounds like Jonathan's a little bit tormented. And where does one get relief? I think about what he said earlier about stopping these dreams from happening, and I wondered if Marcy had any power to stop what was going on with her too.
I stopped those as soon as we left the house. That as soon as I had those, as soon as I said stop, I've had enough. Those nightmares stopped.
Okay, Jonathan.
When I was around, I think 8 years old. So
all right.
Anyway,
thank you. So why don't you listen to the reply off the air? All right. Thank you for calling in.
Not a problem. I'm just glad that I actually got a chance to see you guys live, and thank you very much. I'll continue to watch your shows
Very good.
live.
Thanks a lot. Now,
Thank you.
Have a nice evening.
So Bill, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was going to say it's interesting because he did put into words what a lot of people, and myself included, at one point in time. It is kind of a torment with it being the unknown. I don't think there's a conflict necessarily between UFOs and ghosts or things like that, because they all kind of fall into that unknown kind of behavior. And if the multiverse theory is correct, it would really, they could all be on the same bus. Doesn't mean they know each other, but when people talk about the cryptids, when people talk about UFOs, when people talk about ghosts, if you see a ghost, and I'll plug Paul again, because Paul once said, if you see a ghost outside, it's a UFO. If you see it inside, it's a ghost. So I mean, we kind of look at things in context. What's a UFO versus, well, if UFOs are traveling through the multiverse, then maybe an alien's an entity the same way that an entity at Lindley Street's an entity. I mean, there could be different entities, but it may in fact be more similar than we think. So that's I think one part to put out there.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. They're like I said, they're on the same bus, but they don't know each other, and that would explain a lot of things. And that's not my thought, or that's not a new thought. But the other thing, it's funny. Many years ago, I was really, really into UFOs, and they still fascinate me now. But it's tough because our military builds so many things, and you may not see them for 30 or 40 years. So there's a lot of stuff that could look like UFOs. That doesn't mean I discount, all the UFO stuff. But it just makes it so frustrating to try to understand, try to separate one thing from, bad witnessing, or just an unknown craft. Because I've seen them I saw one on YouTube, and it wasn't a fake, and it was amazing. I mean, that thing looked like a UFO, and the government ended up coming out and saying, no, we were testing, we're testing this, and that's where they built it. It was one of the things that they were able to. It wasn't like so top secret, or evidently it was I think a jet or something. But I'll tell you, it looked crazy on film. So
when you get into, there's a lot of things that have been mistakenly UFOs or Loch Ness monster or whatever. There was a submarine that was mistaken as a lake monster, and then there's plenty of. I talked to a retired intelligence officer, and he says, I can't tell you the amount of times people said something was a UFO, and it was just it was stuff we're working on. He says, and guess what? You're not going to see it for 30 years, and you may not see it at all, So it gets confusing. But back to the original thing. I remember when I was really into UFOs, and I was buying these really cool books from this guy who had a UFO catalog, and that's all he sold was like UFO books, And I remember talking to him on the phone because I had a question on a few books, and I said, "Ma, this is so fascinating." I said, "You must go nuts over this stuff." And he says, "Not anymore." I said, "Why?" He says, "It just gets so frustrating. You read and read and read, and you think you're finding out new stuff, and you think you're getting answers." And he said, "And ultimately, in the end, we just don't know."
Yeah, so that's true. And go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it's not that this listener is going to give up. But that was the first time I heard about that frustration, and I remember reaching it myself, where I had to kind of stop reading about it for a while because I was reading every UFO book, and I'm like, you know what? I'm reading all this stuff, and it still comes to the end where we don't know. So sometimes you do get, as this guy was saying, sometimes you do get burnt out, and that is a frustration. So I think all we could do is be happy we're asking the questions, and just to keep searching, and I'm sure we'll find out that the paranormal is nothing but normal. It's just as we all say, all this stuff's undiscovered science.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm sure we'll learn a lot. So,
yeah.
And then of course there'll always be new questions.
Yeah. My son has a good theory about that. He said, whatever these things are, they actually do have an answer. It's just, what is that answer is, the biggest question. There is an answer to every poltergeist or every ghost or every UFO. And I do a show on UFOs, by the way. and I know a lot of people I do hear that frustration from people that have been in the field a long time. They get burnt out, and a lot of it has to do with, they're looking for an answer. They think they're getting close, and, they're right back where they started. And I've been doing that show for 5 years, and, I kind of feel that way, but it's still very interesting to talk about.
Oh, yeah, and I still, I'll still pick up the UFO book because it still fascinates me, but I think my expectation now, is more in context, but I don't really have that same frustration. I think with on the ghost paranormal end, and I think that's only because maybe it's because I don't really care what they are. I don't know. That's kind of bad, but in other words, and I heard this from some MUFON people, mutual UFO.
Mm-hmm.
One guy says, "Well, you're lucky, because all you need is somebody complaining their house is haunted, and you can go there and you can experience it, and you can help them get rid of it and stuff." He says, "Us, it's tough. You got to wait till you see something, or you hope somebody reports something, and then you've got to wade through it and see is it real or is it a misinterpretation, and most of the time it's a misinterpretation." So he was saying, "Hey, I'm jealous of you, because all you got to do is wait for somebody to call and say things are moving in my house, and chances are you've got something that you could sink your teeth into."
Right.
So I do commend the people who research UFOs, and of course it's more difficult than ever now. You can't go by any photos, and but I think the real fascinating thing about UFOs gets to the level of people who've been abducted. When you hear those similar stories over and over in such minute detail, and psychologists come up to me saying, "Hey, I've been doing this for 30 years, and they're telling the same story, and they don't know each other, and it's in really minute detail." So that's tells me there's something fascinating there. And even if it's not aliens, I don't care what it is. Somebody says, "Oh, it's mass hypnosis," or well, if it is, then we better figure it out because we don't know anything that exists like that. So there's something fascinating there, no matter what you think it is.
And I think
So,
I think it's there's like hundreds of thousands of people reporting the same thing, in this country, in the United States, and it's something that perhaps the therapists and psychiatrists should take more serious and look into it more, I think. But now we're way off the ghost topic. So, but I'm wrapping up the show, and it's been a real pleasure. And I wanted to ask you, do you have anything in the works at this point?
No, not yet. I am really trying to get back into it because people say it took too long off, and and Paul's not helping because now he's popping books out left and right. So it's I'm lazier, but. I've had a few subjects I was looking into, but, I want to make sure it's something that I could really dig into. I don't want to do an urban legend book. I want to do something that has, real research in that I can believe in and, put my stamp on it because people have really liked that. They commended me on saying, geez, it sounds like you're not out to pull the wool over anyone's eyes. You tell it like it is, and and it's hard if you're going to do that. Nick Redfern's an expert at it. I mean, he can put it out there and say, end up with who knows. But I can't even get into it. If I admire that, but I can't get into it unless it's something that I truly think is not only real, but there's a story there. So but that's me. It's and it's probably my own thing. So I am going to try.
Well, I appreciate that you do that, and I know I did hear you on another interview saying that you heard a lot of rumors on this Bridgeport case, but you wouldn't put any of those in your book because you wanted to hear directly from the source instead, and that's what keeps things more interesting and more true, and I do appreciate that you do that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I did. There's one or two I put in, but I said I couldn't verify it, or but yeah, other than that, I didn't want to cloud it because there was crazy rumors about Lindley Street, and that's a case that I know is real. So it becomes very difficult. I mean, we get stuff wrong that's really normal and boring. So you can just imagine the rumors that around about Lindley Street.
Yeah, right. So. And so your website is williamjhallauthor.com. And the book, don't forget, it's The World's Most Haunted House, the story of the Bridgeport Poltergeist on Lindley Street. And that's available on Amazon. Thanks so much. I really had a fun time tonight.
Yes, I did too. Thank you. And if you do order it from my site, of course, I'll sign it for you, include some surprises. So, and I've got the second book, Haunted House Diaries, which includes a diary of many, many years of haunting. So
excellent. All right, Bill. Thank you very much. Have a good night now. Thank you.
You too.
Bye. All right, everyone. So thanks so much for listening. Next week, we'll be back with Denver Michaels. That's his name. And he is going to be talking about lake monsters. That should be an interesting show. So we'll be back next week. I think it's 9 o'clock, that show time, but I'm not really sure. Well, so we'll be back next week. And thanks so much for listening.